Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Ladar Gravelazian. Coming up in today's newscast. Gaza war day 256, and the IDF is making major progress in Rafah. And here are new details on the daring hostage rescue mission from one of the pilots involved. Tensions on the north continue to escalate. What do Israelis think should be done to deal with the threat of Hezbollah? Day 256 of the war in Gaza, and the IDF has announced it believes it will have full control over Rafah in just a few weeks' time. Meanwhile, on the northern border, tensions continue to escalate with Iranian terror proxy Hezbollah, as U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein arrived in Israel to ramp up diplomatic efforts to avoid all-out war. The details in the following report. The Israel Defense Forces announced on Monday that all of Rafah will likely be under IDF control in a few weeks' time. Israeli forces now have complete operational control over the NPK neighborhood in Rafah, a known Hamas stronghold, as well as other key neighborhoods. The army said it has so far eliminated around half of Hamas's forces in Rafah, killing at least 550 terrorists, though estimating the actual number was significantly higher. Along the Philadelphia corridor on Gaza's border with Egypt, the IDF said it had discovered and destroyed more than 200 tunnel shafts, which lead to a complex network of terror tunnels. So far, 25 large tunnels have been discovered leading to the border. Israel has maintained that the operation in Rafah is key to eliminating the last remaining Hamas battalions and terror infrastructure.
אנו פועלים כדי להשמיד ולהכריע את חטיבת רפיח. פשטנו למוצב הכי קדמי של החמאס על קו המים כדי להשמיד בו תשתיות אויב מעל ומתחת לקרקע. הכוחות כרגע פועלים כדי לסיים את המשימה.
Meanwhile, on the northern border, the IDF struck Hezbollah terror infrastructure overnight in southern Lebanon. And an Air Force strike killed terrorist Mohammed Mustafa Ayub, a key operative in the rocket and missile unit of the terror organization, who was involved in promoting and planning missile attacks against Israel from Lebanon. Recent days have seen an escalation on the northern border as Hezbollah fired dozens of missiles into Israel this past week alone. And as such, U.S. President Joe Biden's special envoy Amos Hochstein arrived in Israel on Monday in an effort to ease tensions, warning Israel not to escalate its response to the Iranian terror proxy. During his visit, Hochstein met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and former War Cabinet member Benny Gantz to discuss the Hezbollah threat.
If we weren't concerned about the possibility of escalation and a full-blown second front there to the north, we wouldn't still be involved in such intense diplomacy. And Mr. Hochstein's over there right now. As a matter of fact, he's in Israel as we speak, to have these conversations, and he'll follow that up with conversations in Beirut. So obviously we're concerned about this. We haven't seen Hezbollah jump in with 2 full feet here. They have been, of course, conducting strikes across that border. The Israelis have been defending themselves against that. We don't want to see escalation. We don't want to see a second front. And we are concerned about it.
Since October 7th, Hezbollah has fired thousands of missiles on Israeli communities from southern Lebanon, forcing nearly 100,000 Israelis to relocate and unable to return to their homes. Israel has said it is hoping to resolve the situation diplomatically, but warned that Hezbollah is bringing the region to the brink of war. And speaking of the northern border, an interesting new poll released this week by the Jewish People Policy Institute has found that over half of Israelis feel that Israel should attack Hezbollah with full force. According to the poll, 36% of respondents said Israel should attack Hezbollah as soon as possible, while 26% said Israel should finish the operation in Gaza and then attack. Only 30% said Israel should strive for a political settlement in Lebanon without expanding the war. The survey polled some 800 Jewish and Arab Israelis in June, at a time when massive blazes spread throughout northern Israel as a result of Hezbollah missile attacks. The poll also found that when it comes to the war in Gaza and U.S. President Joe Biden's proposed hostage and ceasefire deal, only 28% of Israelis think it's a good deal, while 32% think it's problematic but that Israel should accept it anyway. And 34% think it is a bad plan that Israel should not accept. Interesting take by many Israelis, many of who see the situation in the north as unsustainable, as Hezbollah is really no different from Hamas, both funded by the Islamic Republic of Iran and both seeking Israel's annihilation. And joining us now with more on the security situation is Daniel Shadmi, spokesperson from Elnet Israel, the European Leadership Network. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to get to the north in a moment, but let's start with Gaza. It seems that the IDF is making major progress, announcing it could be in full control of Rafah in about 2 weeks. I mean, what do you make of this, and what would then be the next step?
It just shows how much, first of all, it just shows how much it's important to continue to maneuver in the south bit of the Gaza Strip, such as Rafah. As you mentioned, many defense and security officials have clearly stated that within a time frame of 2 weeks, they can get a hold of the last territories of Rafah and defeat the 2 last battalions of the Rafah brigades of Hamas. Following that, they would have then dismantled another very strong stronghold of Hamas. Following that, what could happen is potentially, finally, we'll see Hamas getting closer to what Israel has been calling for a while, is the return of the hostages and a potential ceasefire. Because Israel will not stop until Hamas's threat to Israel's borders will be gone.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, the United States is pushing for a diplomatic solution. It's tied the ceasefire deal in Gaza to the diplomatic solution with Hezbollah in the north. So turning to the north, I mean, what's your assessment on this front? You know, how can Israel agree to a diplomatic solution with Hezbollah, keeping it on its border just as it did Hamas prior to October 7th?
Well, first of all, we must always remember that when we talk about a diplomatic solution, the actors on the other side are not democracies such as the Israel, the US, or European countries that are involved in these negotiations. They are terrorist organizations, and their rationale are not the same as the ones of Western democracies. When we call a diplomatic solution, it's something that Israel will abide by if there's a declaration of a ceasefire or a diplomatic solution where it pushes Hezbollah north of the Litani River. The link between the two is a hope that Hezbollah will withhold its arms when a ceasefire in the south will occur. Now, Hezbollah can decide whatever it wants. It won't necessarily need to abide by these rules, because we've seen there's a UN Security Council Resolution 1701 that clearly declares that Hezbollah forces cannot be south of the Litani River, and yet we've seen since October 7th, but even since 2006, they're very much present and have been firing on Israel. So the hope of the American negotiators, Amos Hochstein's the special envoy, is that once a ceasefire is met in the south, Hezbollah will also stop its aggression towards Israel. Now, within Israel, there's a vivid debate as a democracy that we are, is to whether we shall, how will the citizens of the north return and feel safe, even if Hezbollah stops the firing of rockets towards the villages of the north, whether the citizens of Israel will feel safe to go back to their homes.
Yeah. That's a very good point. And, you know, we do speak a lot about the U.S. role in the war, but I want to hear from you about Europe's role. You know, what is Europe's role today with respect to Gaza, with respect to a plan for the day after? You know, we're seeing very mixed reactions from European leaders. So what can you tell us about this?
So to begin with, especially at Elnet, where we work to strengthen relations between Israel and Europe, I must say that it might be sometimes an unpopular opinion amongst the media or even the discourse, the political discourse. But what we've seen since October 7 is an unprecedented support. In previous rounds of escalation or war that happened with Israel, whether in Lebanon or in the conflict with the Palestinians in the West Bank or in Gaza, the support quickly faded. And here we are, over 8 months in Israel's longest war, with this biggest surprise attack known at least since the Yom Kippur War. And yet European governments still support and still give wind of support to Israel's right to defend itself. So Europe's role is very important here in the day after as well, and onto how to end the hostilities and build on something new. We, for example, just hosted a conference in Berlin, a European Middle East conference, to discuss the day after with representatives from the Gulf, from the Palestinians, and from Israel, and of course Europeans, as it was placed in Europe. Europe's role is critical here, and we call upon Europeans to be more involved and less in a unilateral way, as we've seen from some policies or politicians. But their role is very, very important here. They're friends of Israel, and we should continue to work together in that aspect.
All right, Daniel Shadmi, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Thank you so much.
And the release of 4 hostages by Israeli forces left many shocked and brought tears of joy to Israelis during such complex times. In a new interview with the pilot who took part in the operation, he shared more details on the rescue mission. ILTV's Rachel Safdie has the report.
A pilot that took part in the release of Almog Meir-Jan, Shlomi Ziv, and Andrei Kozlov recently shared more details about the daring operation.
I knew the amount of hostages that were supposed to be released, and I didn't know their names because of the sensitive of this operation. Very few people in the army knew the names and the identity of the hostages that were supposed to be released.
He mentioned the expeditious team of Israeli special forces that made the rescue happen.
Thanks to the excellent ground troops that we have inside Gaza Strip, our landing and our loading of the 3 hostages lasted less than 1 minute. Well, when I first saw the 3 hostages, Shlomi, Almog, and Andrei, walking in the helicopter, I felt relief and happiness that surrounded the whole team, the whole helicopter team that were in this mission.
And his first contact with the hostages as they had just been released was a moment that stayed with him.
As we were landing in Gaza coast, I looked back and I saw the 3 hostages coming in the helicopter. I looked at Shlomi, and as soon as we took off, I looked him in the eyes and I gave him thumbs up, wanted to signal him that it's all right, he's coming home. And well, I remember this feeling since the operation. I can't stop thinking about it.
Pilot, soldier, or civilian, every Israeli cheered as 4 of the hostages returned home.
What an incredible hostage rescue operation. And moving on, Israeli protesters were arrested on Monday night after they attempted to break through police barricades surrounding Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Jerusalem residence. The situation got out of hand after some Israelis took to the streets to condemn the government's policies. ILTV's Mayan Hoffman has the story.
At least 1 person was wounded and 9 arrested late Monday, Israel police said, after they clashed with anti-government protesters near Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Jerusalem home. Protesters calling for new elections rallied in the streets of Jerusalem in the afternoon, convening outside the country's parliament before marching toward Netanyahu's private apartment in the city. Many waved Israeli flags. Others carried signs criticizing Netanyahu's handling of pivotal issues, like promoting a divisive military draft bill that exempts ultra-Orthodox Jews from otherwise mandatory service, as well as his handling of the war with Hamas in Gaza and fighting with Lebanon's Hezbollah. The wartime unity government collapsed last week when Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot resigned. This left Netanyahu reliant on ultra-Orthodox and far-right partners whose hardline policies had already deeply divided Israeli society even before Hamas's attack on October 7th ignited the war in Gaza. In response to Gantz's departure, opposition groups have launched a week of street protests, which include blocking highways and organizing mass demonstrations.
The healing process of the Israeli country will start here. It started last week when Benny Gantz and Eisenkot left the coalition. We are continuing this process, and hopefully this government will resign soon. As if it won't resign, Israel will not survive.
I hope that the Israeli people will come in hundreds of thousands to say enough to the Israeli government, to Netanyahu, and hopefully this is the day that we will start the change. from the destruction that Netanyahu made to a revolution and then to revive the Israeli society and the Israeli people.
Eventually, when the protesters reached Netanyahu's house, some of them broke off and tried to break through barriers set up by the police, who pushed them back. At one point, a bonfire was lit in the street. Police were forced to use a water cannon to disperse the demonstration, which resulted in the arrests.
The notoriously anti-Israel foreign minister of Norway has announced that his country would top up its support for UNRWA, the UN agency for Palestinian refugees. He said in a press conference that there is simply no alternative today nor in the foreseeable future to the work of UNRWA. Entirely, of course, disregarding UNRWA's systematic complicity in the October 7th massacre. Well, to the Norwegian foreign minister, here are a few facts about UNRWA that you should know. Number one, UNRWA employees participated in the October 7th massacre. This is a fact. 12 UNRWA employees were identified as actively taking part in the massacre. UNRWA teachers held Israeli hostages captive in their own apartments. The foreign minister says these are just a few bad apples in an otherwise reputable organization. But the truth is that UNRWA complicity with the Hamas terrorist group goes far beyond October 7th. Intelligence estimates that 10% of UNRWA staff have direct ties to Hamas. And as the IDF conducts operations in Gaza, it has found numerous UNRWA badges on Hamas terrorists. UNRWA humanitarian aid worker by day and Hamas terrorist by night. It is found that Hamas used UNRWA facilities to launch terror attacks against Israelis. It has found hidden tunnel shafts in UNRWA buildings leading to underground terror tunnels, even directly beneath UNRWA's headquarters in Gaza. UNRWA even provided them with electricity. These are not just a few bad apples. This is systemic collaboration with Hamas in Gaza. And this is not new information. Norway's foreign minister is choosing to ignore and downplay these glaring and obvious facts. Number two, over half of UNRWA's budget, 58%, is spent on education, with some 500,000 students learning in UNRWA schools. That statistic is from UNRWA itself. But what exactly is UNRWA teaching in its schools? Well, international report after international report for years have found that UNRWA textbooks contain anti-Semitism, legitimize and even incite to violence, and outright deny Israel's very existence. Teaching young Palestinian children that one day Israel will be destroyed and they can go live in Tel Aviv. And UNRWA teachers, well, a new report this year from UN Watch, the UN watchdog, found that 3,000 UNRWA teachers and staff in a Telegram group cheered and celebrated the October 7th massacre. They shared photos of the atrocities committed by Hamas and cheered on the terrorists, praying for their success. These are UNRWA's teachers. Teachers in Israel teach peace and coexistence. It's mandatory in every school curriculum in Israel. Foreign Minister, would you want these UNRWA teachers teaching your children, teaching Norway's children? And last but not least, fact number three, there is an alternative to UNRWA. It's called the UN Refugee Agency, or the UNHCR, which is responsible for all of the world's refugees. They're responsible for around 20 million refugees today. But only the Palestinians have their own special agency, UNRWA. And UNRWA somehow categorizes descendants of those born in the British Mandate of Palestine, even if they're citizens of another country, as a refugee, completely inconsistent with how other refugees in the world are classified. So if you were born in the United States to a father born in the British Mandate and displaced by the 1948 war, and you have full American citizenship, you are still considered a Palestinian refugee. So that even multimillionaire American supermodels Gigi and Bella Hadid are considered Palestinian refugees eligible for UNRWA services. And even Palestinians living in Gaza today, in their so-called homeland, are also considered refugees. This ensures that UNRWA gets to add more refugees under its mandate every year, essentially cementing Palestinians as eternal refugees. So, Foreign Minister, why should Palestinians have their own refugee agency with special extra benefits? Are they considered above the other refugees by Norway? So there you have it. And every country resuming funding to UNRWA is essentially funding Hamas. and is entirely complicit in its terrorism against Israel. And finally, in some positive news, comedian Modi Rosenfeld brought laughs to Jerusalemites this week in the shadow of the October 7th massacre. He met up with ILTV's Mayan Hoffman after the show to tell her why he keeps performing, even when what Israel is experiencing is so sad. Let's take a look.
Jewish comedian Modi Rosenfeld was back in Israel this week to perform in Jerusalem. His Sunday night show at the Jerusalem Theater drew a full house. The artist, born in Tel Aviv and raised in Long Island, now living in Manhattan, has been voted one of the top 10 comedians in New York City by The Hollywood Reporter. On Monday, Modi met with ILTV at the ANU Museum of the Jewish People on the Tel Aviv University campus, where he walked through a temporary exhibition featuring dozens of works by Israeli artists related to October 7th and the ongoing war with Hamas. In an interview, Modi told ILTV that his comedy show in Jerusalem was unbelievable.
Real Mashiach energy, people that you could just tell really needed a laugh, were laughing, and in the right way at the right things, and together, harmony.
Now, you've been to Israel many times, but I'm assuming the vibe is different since October 7th. Tell me about what you feel here in the country.
We were here during October 7th. We had a tour before. During Sukkot, we had a comedy tour, and then October 7th, the war broke out. We went to Paris to do shows there. They were scheduled, and we realized we have to keep doing it. Even we have to keep people making people laugh, giving them a minute to just pause for laughter, which is my new tour, Pause for Laughter. It's so important just to take some time and laugh, and then go back to praying and helping and doing whatever you can to help with the war. And after every show, I've been singing Hatikva, just to remind everybody, even though we just had this hour and a half of laughter, don't forget, our hearts, our prayers, our souls are all with Israel.
Now, I assume that the majority of people that you are performing for are Jewish, but maybe there are some who aren't. How is it to sing Hatikva, not here in Israel, but in other places that you perform, given the sentiment internationally?
When I do it in America, when I do it in Berlin, when I do it in Frankfurt, in Vienna, in London, even people who don't know Hatikva, Jews and non-Jews, they feel it. The song is so strong, and they're so happy to be a part of it and hear it. And non-Jews tell me it's such a great soulful experience.
Too early to make jokes about October 7th?
It's not about October 7th. You're making humor and material, not about hostages and soldiers and death and dying. You're doing how Americans have come to help, the missions, that kind of jokes. Even though it's amazing that people are coming here to help, to barbecue with soldiers on the front line, that's where you find the humor. I make fun of anti-Semitism. That's how you find the humor. You have to have a very, very, very strong balance.
You're going to leave this country. I'm sure you're going to come back, but for now you're going to travel after having gone through this experience, walked through the different exhibits, visited with the people 9 months almost into this war. What is the message that you want to leave with everybody, and what is the message that you're leaving with?
Pause for laughter. Take a moment in all of your news consumption, in all of your helping, whatever you can to do. Take a few minutes, watch some comedy, send it to a friend, tell a joke. It'll remind another friend of a joke. You begin to tell jokes. It's so important. The body needs it, physically, mentally, chemically. You need to be able to have a laugh.
And now, let's take a look at the weather forecast. In mostly clear skies are expected tonight around the country, with temperatures reaching lows of about 22 degrees Celsius or 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, temperatures should rise slightly alongside sunny skies and reach highs of 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channel, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our new and improved website, ILTV.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Ladar Grave-Lazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.